John chapter 8, verses 12 to 20. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The Pharisees challenged him. "Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid." Jesus answered, "Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I come from and where I am going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are true, because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me." Then they asked him, "Where is your Father?" "You do not know me or my Father," Jesus replied. "If you knew me, you would know my Father also." He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the palace where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him, because his hour had not yet come.
Last week we were looking at a passage which we are unsure whether it was in the original Greek New Testament, and if it was, exactly where it fits, whether it was written by Luke or by John, and where it fits into the sequence of events. Now, when we were talking before that, we looked at the passage in John chapter 7, which finished at verse 52. And in many ways, it is easy to consider today's passage as though it flows on from that, because it has Jesus talking to the people and to the Jewish leaders. And here there is a little technicality also that we need to consider. But this technicality is not about theology or about the nature of the Bible. It is to do with the law courts. Now, in the ancient courts, and particularly in the Jewish courts, if you were to bring somebody to prosecution, you needed two witnesses. And also today, we realize in our own courts how difficult it can be to successfully prosecute somebody if someone only has one witness. Sometimes on the television programs, you hear people say that they have a case that might be he said, she said, as though one person says that something is true and the other person says that the other thing is true, and it becomes impossible to prosecute successfully. And this is what Jesus is accused of here. He is told that his testimony is not true because there is no one else to support what he is saying. Now, Jesus makes 2 points. First of all, he says almost, well, of course there is no one else to support what I am saying in an earthly term, because nobody else here has come from where I have come from. No one else has come from heaven. But then he makes the point that there is one in heaven who stands beside his testimony. And he says that his Father is the second who supports his testimony. Now, no doubt in Jesus' day, there were rumors about Jesus' parenthood. You may remember that there were questions raised about Joseph because Mary became pregnant before Joseph and Mary had ever come together. Now, there may be a sense here that this rumor had even spread to Jerusalem. And so when the Jewish leaders say, "Where is your father?" they may be casting aspersions on who Jesus is. But Jesus says, "You do not know my Father. You do not know me or my Father." Now, if they are seeking to scandalize about him, then he, by return, says something that is much more scandalous. These are the leaders of the religion of the day. And Jesus says to them effectively, "You do not know God. This is why you do not recognize who I am or my message. You do not know God." And Jesus makes it quite clear here that he has come into the world to bring understanding about God. And that if they reject him or we reject him, then we have an opportunity to know God that we are turning aside. Because it is Jesus in his person and in his teaching that helps us to understand who God is. Jesus says he is the light of the world. Now, John in his gospel makes the point that the world is a dark place. And Jesus is saying by implication that he has come into the world to illuminate what can be known about God, to illuminate the world, to give people an opportunity to change their ways. Now, I guess most of you know that I have been through some difficult times and still going through some difficult times with my eyesight recently. And one of the things that this has taught me is an empathy with people who are blind. For about 3 weeks, I could barely see anything at all. And I stumbled around because whereas people who are blind have had a long period to learn how to cope with that condition, I suddenly found myself thrust into that. And at one point, whilst I was away on my prayer retreat, I fell very badly and almost into the path of a double-decker bus. And the double-decker bus had to stop and make sure that I was all right. It was like stumbling around in the darkness. And Jesus is saying that we stumble around in the darkness, not physically, but morally. And if we reject him, we do that of our own intention, of our own volition, of our own choice. Because the light is there, and we have to step into it. But as John also makes clear earlier in his gospel, that one of the advantages of darkness is that it hides the things that we do that are wrong. And therefore, sometimes we choose to operate in the darkness. There is a reason why the majority of burglaries are committed at night, because it is easier to do something when you are concealed by the cloak of darkness. But Jesus also says something about this light that he is, this light of the world. He says that whoever follows Jesus will have the light of life. Now, the light of life is an interesting phrase. If we go right back to the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, one of the peculiar things is that we find out that there was light in the order of creation before God created the sun and the moon. And in some ways that seems ridiculous. But then if we go to the end of the New Testament, we find out that in the New Jerusalem, God says that there will be no need of a sun because there will be the light of the Lamb, the light of God. And this is an interesting idea because the light of life is something that is never extinguished. The light of the sun, as we know, goes out every evening. It doesn't go out in the strictest sense. It is concealed as the sun goes down. In the strictest sense, the sun doesn't go down. It just goes out of our range of vision. The light of life never goes down, never disappears. And therefore, it means that for those who partake in the light of life, life never ends. It is eternal. And just as sundown doesn't mean that the sun goes out, then death in this world does not mean that the light of life is distinguished. It carries on into God's heavenly kingdom, where there is no need of the sun, because our light is the light of God. Now, this is very important today in our current era. Life today for most of us, or maybe even for all of us, is very confusing. In this year of 2020, we have found ourselves in a situation that we don't understand. If you do understand it, I would love to talk to you more and gain some understanding, because we have mostly been thrust into a situation we don't know how to deal with, that governments don't know how to deal with, that scientists don't know how to deal with it, that religious people don't know how to deal with it. There are all kinds of things that are unknowns, that we're not sure what decisions we ought to take. But the Bible makes clear that what happens in this world is an exhibition of the fact that God is in control. We can see it in this passage. It says in the end of the passage, it says that Jesus spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him, because his hour had not yet come. No one seized him because his hour had not yet come. He could have been seized, he could have been arrested, he could have been put to death. But the time was not yet. God was in control. No matter what the religious leaders or those that the religious leaders called upon to help them in their work wanted. They couldn't do this thing until God's time. And this is the same in any generation, in any year. What happens is controlled by God, who is Almighty. It is painful for us to realize that what is happening in the world at the moment is being allowed by God. But it must be a fact because God is in control. And therefore we can be confident that this will come to an end in God's time. We can be confident that God has set for us the day we were born and the day that we will die. We will not die by accident because of this virus. When I was talking earlier about the fact that I fell and a double-decker bus was coming along for me, if I had stumbled into the path of the double-decker bus and been hit, that would have been an indication, perhaps, that it was my time to die. I don't know, but God does. And so therefore, in everything that is happening at the moment, it is important that our faith is strong. Not only our faith in the fact that the nurses and the doctors are helping society, not only our faith in the fact that the research that the scientists will do may bring forward vaccines that have some success. Not even the fact that most of what we read on the internet about the current situation ought to be put out with your garbage. Not only these things, but over and above all of this, and most confidently, know that God is in control. And just as the light of the world was available to people during this time when Jesus spoke in the temple courts, it is available today. And just as those who trusted in Jesus then would receive the light of life, and that light of life would never be extinguished, then now, if we trust in Jesus, we receive the light of life, and that light of life will never be extinguished. Amen.